Picture this. Professor William Hartley is proctoring what he thinks is just another routine psychology exam when suddenly the classroom door explodes open. 6 Navy SEALs in full tactical gear storm in, weapons drawn, scanning the room with military precision. But instead of securing a threat, their commanding officer walks directly to the third row, stops in front of the quietest girl in class, and renders a perfect military salute. The girl everyone ignored, everyone overlooked, everyone assumed was just another struggling college student. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But let me tell you how this incredible story really began, because what happened that Tuesday morning at Riverside State University would change everything everyone thought they knew about assumptions, service, and the heroes hiding in plain sight. Riverside State University operated with the predictable rhythm of academic life. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m., students shuffled into Psychology 301, clutching coffee cups and checking their phones one last time before Professor William Hartley's notorious exams. The lecture hall buzzed with the familiar pre-test anxiety, whispered last-minute cramming, nervous laughter, and the rustle of papers being organized with desperate hope. Professor Hartley had been teaching abnormal psychology for 15 years, long enough to recognize every type of student who walked through his doors. The overachievers who sat in the front row with color-coded notes. The athletes who showed up 5 minutes late, still smelling faintly of the gym. The party crowd who looked like they'd rolled out of bed 10 minutes ago. And then there were the invisible ones. The students who somehow managed to attend every class without anyone really noticing they were there. Zoe Brennan fell squarely into that last category. She always sat in the same spot, third row from the front, second seat from the left. Not close enough to draw attention from the professor, not far enough back to seem disengaged. She wore the same rotation of unremarkable clothes, faded jeans, plain sweaters, worn sneakers that had seen better days. Her dark hair was usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a beat-up backpack that looked like it had survived several natural disasters. Connor Walsh, who sat 2 rows behind her, had been in 3 classes with Zoe over the past 2 years and couldn't remember her ever speaking up voluntarily. Not once. She turned in her assignments on time, scored consistently in the B+ range, and seemed to exist in a bubble of studied invisibility that most students her age would find socially suffocating. "I don't think I've ever heard her voice," Connor had mentioned to his study group the week before. Like, not even to ask a question or participate in discussions. It's weird. "Some people are just shy," Emma Vasquez had replied, though she seemed uncomfortable with the observation. Emma was Zoe's roommate in the Morrison Hall dormitory, and even she struggled to explain her living situation to friends. "She's always studying or, I don't know, doing something on her laptop. She's not antisocial exactly, just private." What Emma didn't mention was how Zoe's privacy extended to almost pathological levels. In 18 months of sharing a dorm room, Emma had never seen Zoe receive personal mail, never heard her talk to family on the phone, never witnessed her going on dates or hanging out with friends. Zoe's side of the room was monastically neat, containing only the bare essentials of college life, plus a locked footlocker that Emma had always assumed contained seasonal clothes or personal mementos. The morning of October 15th began like any other exam day. Professor Hartley arrived at 10:15, his usual 15 minutes early, wheeling in a cart with neatly stacked exam booklets and his standard "good luck, you'll need it" expression. Students trickled in over the next 10 minutes, most looking like they'd spent the previous night alternating between panic studying and questioning their life choices. Zoe entered at exactly 10:28, as she always did. Not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to draw attention. She took her usual seat, pulled out a single blue pen, and sat with her hands folded, watching Professor Hartley prepare to distribute the exams with the same neutral expression she wore to every class. Connor noticed her, as he had started doing more frequently since his conversation with Emma. There was something about Zoe's stillness that seemed different from mere shyness. She didn't fidget like nervous students did. She didn't check her phone or whisper with classmates. She simply sat there, alert but calm, like someone waiting for something she knew was coming.
All right, people, Professor Hartley announced as he began walking down the aisles with exam booklets. You have 90 minutes for this exam. No phones, no smartwatches, no communication with your neighbors. If you need to use the restroom, raise your hand and I will escort you personally to ensure academic integrity.
He placed a booklet on Zoe's desk without really looking at her, as he had done dozens of times before. She thanked him quietly, so quietly that Connor, sitting just 2 rows back, had to strain to hear it. Her voice was steady, unremarkable, exactly what you'd expect from someone who had perfected the art of being overlooked. The exam covered 3 weeks of material on post-traumatic stress disorder, focusing heavily on military veterans and their reintegration challenges. Professor Hartley had designed it to be particularly challenging, requiring students to synthesize complex psychological theories with real-world case studies. Most students would spend the first 10 minutes just reading through the questions and planning their approach. Zoe opened her booklet and began writing immediately. Connor watched her from behind, fascinated despite himself. While other students were still scanning the questions, occasionally grimacing or shaking their heads, Zoe's pen moved across the page with steady confidence. She didn't pause to think, didn't reread questions, didn't exhibit any of the usual signs of an overwhelmed test taker. She wrote like someone who knew exactly what she wanted to say and had simply been waiting for the opportunity to say it. 20 minutes into the exam, something unusual happened. Professor Hartley's office phone rang, which was odd because he always silenced it during exams. Even more unusual was his decision to answer it, stepping into the hallway for a brief, hushed conversation that left him looking puzzled when he returned. "Carry on," he announced, unnecessarily since no one had stopped working. But Connor noticed that the professor's eyes lingered on certain students as he resumed his position at the front of the room. There was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before, like someone who had just received news that didn't quite make sense. The next 40 minutes passed in the usual exam silence, broken only by the scratch of pens on paper and the occasional sigh of academic frustration. Students began finishing at different times, approaching Professor Hartley's desk to turn in their booklets, before gathering their belongings and leaving with the relieved expressions of people who had survived another academic trial. Zoe finished with 30 minutes remaining, which wasn't particularly unusual for her. She always completed assignments efficiently, neither rushing nor dawdling. What was unusual was the way she sat after closing her exam booklet, not immediately getting up to leave like the other early finishers. Instead, she remained in her seat, hands folded, looking toward the windows with an expression that Connor couldn't quite read. It was 11:47 a.m. when everything changed. The sound came first, boots in the hallway, moving with a precision and urgency that was completely foreign to the casual shuffle of college foot traffic. Professor Hartley looked up from grading the completed exams, his brow furrowing as the sound grew closer and more distinct. It wasn't the random noise of students changing classes, it was something else entirely. The classroom door didn't open so much as explode inward. 6 figures in full tactical gear poured through the entrance with the fluid efficiency of a military operation. Navy SEALs in desert camouflage, armed and alert, spreading out to secure the room with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. The students who remained in the classroom, about 15 of them, still working on their exams, froze in absolute shock. Professor Hartley dropped his red grading pen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. "What in the hell?" "Secure the perimeter," came a crisp female voice from the doorway. Commander Jessica Hunt stepped into the room, her bearing unmistakably military despite the civilian clothes she wore beneath a tactical vest. Her eyes swept the classroom once, cataloging faces and positions before locking onto a specific target. The 3rd row, 2nd seat from the left. Zoe Brennan sat exactly as she had moments before, hands folded, expression unchanged, but something in her posture had shifted.
The careful invisibility was gone, replaced by something that Connor would later struggle to describe. She looked like someone who had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Commander Hunt walked directly to Zoe's desk, her boots clicking against the linoleum floor in the absolute silence that had fallen over the classroom. She stopped precisely 3 feet away, came to attention, and rendered a perfect military salute. "Ma'am," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Zoe returned the salute with movements that spoke of years of military training and smiled for the first time since Connor had known her. "Likewise, Commander, though I have to say your timing could use some work." The classroom erupted in whispers, gasps, and the scraping of chairs as students turned to stare at the girl they had spent 2 years ignoring. Professor Hartley stood frozen behind his desk, his 15 years of academic experience providing no framework for understanding what he was witnessing. Connor Walsh felt his world tilt on its axis when he realized that everything he thought he knew about the quiet girl in row 3 had been completely, utterly wrong. The aftermath of Commander Hunt's salute hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, nobody moved. The Navy SEALs maintained their positions around the classroom perimeter, their weapons lowered but ready. Professor Hartley stood frozen behind his desk, still clutching exam papers that suddenly seemed trivial compared to whatever operation was unfolding in his Psychology 301 classroom. Zoe Brennan, or whoever she really was, remained standing behind her desk, no longer the invisible student who had spent 2 years perfecting the art of being overlooked. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders had straightened, her stance had shifted to something more alert and purposeful. And when she spoke to Commander Hunt, her voice carried an authority that had never been there during class discussions. "Status report, Commander," Zoe said quietly, but her words cut through the silence with military precision. "Perimeter secure, ma'am. No complications during approach. Local authorities have been notified of training exercise parameters." Commander Hunt's response was crisp, professional, and completely incomprehensible to everyone else in the room. Connor watched this exchange with growing disbelief. The girl he had shared classes with for 2 years, the one he had literally described as weird just weeks ago, was receiving military briefings from a Navy SEAL commander. His mind raced back through every interaction he had witnessed, searching for clues he had missed. How would he never notice the way she moved? Now that he was really looking, Connor could see that Zoe's casual walk wasn't casual at all. She moved with the controlled efficiency of someone trained to navigate hostile environments. When she sat down, she always positioned herself with clear sightlines to both the door and windows. When other students crowded around her, she maintained specific distances that would allow for quick movement. "Ma'am," Professor Hartley finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak, "I need someone to explain what's happening in my classroom." Commander Hunt looked to Zoe, who nodded slightly. "Professor Hartley, I apologize for the disruption. This is a security verification exercise. These personnel needed to confirm the identity and status of one of your students." Commander Hunt's explanation was technically accurate, but revealed nothing meaningful. "We'll be departing momentarily." Security verification? Professor Hartley's academic mind was finally beginning to process what he was seeing. "Are you telling me that Ms. Brennan is some kind of... What exactly are you telling me?" Zoe spoke before Commander Hunt could respond. "Professor, I'm a student in your class. That hasn't changed. What you're witnessing is related to my previous military service. Nothing more." But Connor could see that wasn't the whole truth. The way the SEALs deferred to Zoe, the formal protocol in their interactions, the fact that they had tracked her down in the middle of a college exam, none of that suggested previous anything. This was current, active, and important enough to justify storming a university classroom. Emma Vasquez, who had remained in her seat near the back of the room, finally found her voice. "Zoe," the single word carried 18 months of confusion, of living with someone she had never really known. What is this? Zoe turned to look at her roommate, and for the first time since the seals had arrived, something resembling the old, invisible student flickered across her features. Emma, I'm sorry. I know this looks confusing. I'll explain everything later, I promise. But even that promise sounded different now. Where once Zoe's voice carried the uncertain tone of a typical college student, now it held the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to giving assurances that mattered, someone whose word carried weight in situations far more serious than dorm room conversations. Connor noticed that several of his classmates were reaching for their phones, probably to record what was happening or text friends about the bizarre scene unfolding. Commander Hunt noticed too. "Phones away," she said, not loudly, but with unmistakable authority. "This is a secure operation. No recording devices, no photography, no social media posts. Anyone who violates this directive will be dealt with according to federal protocols." The phones disappeared immediately. Something in Commander Hunt's tone made it clear this wasn't a request subject to negotiation. Tyler Brooks, a senior who usually spent classes playing games on his laptop, raised his hand tentatively. Are we in some kind of danger? Should we be evacuating or something?" "You're in no danger," Zoe answered before Commander Hunt could respond. "This is routine verification, nothing more. You can continue your exams." But nobody was continuing their exams. The remaining students sat transfixed, watching an interaction that seemed to belong in a movie rather than their Tuesday morning psychology class. Connor found himself studying Zoe's face, looking for traces of the girl he thought he had known, but finding a stranger instead.
How had she maintained the charade for so long? 2 years of sitting through lectures about trauma and PTSD, never once giving any indication that she might have first-hand experience with the subjects being discussed. Connor remembered Professor Hartley's unit on military veterans and their reintegration challenges. Zoe had written her midterm paper on the topic, earning praise for her insightful analysis of the psychological barriers facing returning service members. At the time, Connor had assumed she was just good at research. Now he realized she had been writing from personal experience, hiding her expertise behind the mask of academic theory. Commander Hunt received something through her earpiece and nodded. "Ma'am, we need to wrap this up. Transport is standing by." "Transport?" Professor Hartley's voice had risen an octave. "Transport to where? Ms. Brennan, you have a final exam in 3 weeks. You have a semester to complete." Zoe looked at the professor with something that might have been genuine regret. "I understand your concern, Professor. My academic standing will be handled through appropriate channels. The university will be contacted with necessary documentation." The bureaucratic language was jarring, coming from someone who just an hour earlier had been taking an exam on abnormal psychology like any other student. Connor realized that even Zoe's speech patterns had changed. Gone was the slightly uncertain tone of a college student. In its place was the precise vocabulary of someone comfortable navigating official protocols. Documentation? Professor Hartley was beginning to sound like a man whose worldview was crumbling in real time. What kind of documentation? Who do I contact? What am I supposed to tell the registrar? "That will be handled above your level, sir," Commander Hunt interjected. "You'll receive appropriate communication through official channels within 24 hours. Emma raised her hand, a gesture that seemed absurdly formal given the circumstances. "What about her stuff? Her clothes, her books, her—" She trailed off, apparently realizing how trivial personal belongings seemed in the context of military operations. "Arrangements will be made," Zoe said, but her attention was clearly shifting away from the classroom and toward whatever came next. Connor could see her transforming before his eyes, the invisible student dissolving to reveal someone whose priorities lay far beyond final exams and semester grades. Commander Hunt made a subtle hand signal, and the SEALs began adjusting their positions, preparing to move out. The exercise, or whatever this really was coming to an end. "Wait," Connor called out, surprising himself. "This doesn't make sense. You can't just leave. What about everything? What about the last 2 years?"
Zoe looked at him directly for what Connor realized was probably the first time since they had known each other. Her gaze was steady, measuring, like someone evaluating a potential asset or threat. "Connor Walsh," she said, and he was startled that she knew his full name. Sometimes the most important service happens in places where no one notices. Sometimes the best way to protect people is to let them believe they're safe because nothing extraordinary is happening around them. The words hit Connor like a physical blow. For 2 years, he had shared classes with someone whose very presence had been an act of service he couldn't comprehend. While he had been worried about grades and social plans, Zoe had been, what? Watching? Protecting? Gathering intelligence? "Ma'am, we need to move," Commander Hunt said urgently. Zoe nodded and collected her backpack, the same beat-up bag Connor had seen her carry every day, now revealed as likely containing equipment he couldn't even imagine. She walked toward the door, flanked by the SEALs, moving with the confident stride of someone leaving one mission and heading toward another. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at the classroom one final time. Her gaze swept over the students who had spent 2 years not really seeing her, lingered briefly on Professor Hartley, and settled finally on Emma. "Thank you for making me feel normal," she said simply. Then she was gone, leaving behind 23 people who would never again be certain about what normal actually meant.
The silence that followed Zoe's departure was unlike anything Connor had ever experienced. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a library or the expectant hush before a lecture began. This was the heavy, suffocating silence of a group of people trying to process something that defied all logical explanation. Professor Hartley stood behind his desk like a statue, still holding the exam papers that had seemed so important 30 minutes earlier. His mouth opened and closed several times as if he were trying to speak, but no words came out. Connor could see the professor's academic mind struggling to categorize what had just happened, searching for a framework that could make sense of Navy SEALs, military protocols, and the transformation of his most invisible student into someone who commanded the respect of elite special forces. Emma Vasquez was the first to break the silence. "Did that actually happen?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the absolute quiet of the classroom, it sounded like a shout. Tyler Brooks, still staring at the doorway where Zoe had disappeared, slowly shook his head. "I feel like I'm losing my mind. That was Zoe Brennan, right? The girl who sits in the third row and never talks to anyone? The girl who does her laundry at 2 a.m. because she doesn't want to interact with people in the common areas?" Emma added, her voice growing stronger as the reality began to sink in. "The girl who eats cereal for dinner because she says cooking is too complicated. The girl who told me she was from Ohio and had never traveled anywhere interesting." Connor found himself standing up without remembering the decision to do so. His legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath him had shifted fundamentally. "Professor, what do we do now? Do we just continue the exam? Pretend this didn't happen?" Professor Hartley finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and uncertain. I honestly don't know. In 15 years of teaching, I've never..." He gestured helplessly at the doorway. "This isn't covered in any faculty handbook I've ever read." The remaining students began looking at each other with new eyes, as if wondering who else among them might be harboring impossible secrets. Connor noticed that several classmates were studying each other's faces with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for conspiracy theories and spy movies. "How did we not know?" asked Jessica Murphy, a pre-med student who prided herself on being observant. "I mean, there had to be signs, right? People don't just become Navy SEAL operatives overnight." "Maybe that's the point," Connor said slowly, the pieces beginning to form a pattern in his mind. "Maybe the whole purpose was that we weren't supposed to know. Maybe being invisible was exactly what she was trying to achieve." Emma pulled out her phone and began scrolling frantically. "I'm looking up her social media profiles. If she's some kind of military operative, there has to be some trace of it online, right?" But after several minutes of searching, Emma's expression grew more confused rather than enlightened. "There's nothing. I mean, there's a Facebook profile, but it's just normal college stuff.
Pictures of campus, generic posts about studying for exams, complaints about cafeteria food. It's like she created the most boring social media presence possible. That's not normal either, Tyler pointed out. Nobody our age has genuinely boring social media. We all curate our online presence to look interesting or fun or successful. But Zoe's profiles are so aggressively ordinary that they're actually suspicious. Connor thought back to every interaction he had witnessed between Zoe and other students. She had never been rude or unfriendly, but she had maintained a consistent distance that he had attributed to shyness. Now he wondered if it had been something else entirely. Professional discipline, perhaps, or training that taught her to avoid forming attachments that could compromise her mission. Her room, Emma said suddenly, standing up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. We need to see her room. If she was really some kind of undercover operative, there might be clues, equipment, something that explains what just happened. Professor Hartley held up a hand. Wait, we can't just go searching through a student's personal belongings. There are privacy laws, university policies. Professor, Connor interrupted. I don't think normal university policies apply when Navy SEALs are involved. This is obviously way beyond typical academic situations. The professor considered this, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that made him look older than his 53 years. You're probably right, but that doesn't mean we should start acting like amateur detectives. If Miss Brennan, or whoever she really is, was involved in classified government work, then anything we might find could be dangerous or illegal for us to possess.
Emma wasn't deterred. I lived with her for 18 months. If anyone has a right to understand who she really was, it's me. I trusted her, shared personal information with her, considered her a friend. If that was all fake, the hurt in Emma's voice was genuine and raw. Connor realized that while the rest of them were dealing with curiosity and confusion, Emma was grappling with a fundamental betrayal. She had opened her life to someone who had been living a complete lie, someone whose very presence in her daily routine had been an act of deception. It might not have been fake, Connor said carefully. I mean, her feelings might have been real, even if her identity wasn't. Maybe she really did consider you a friend. How can you consider someone a friend when everything about your relationship is based on lies? Emma's voice was getting louder, drawing attention from the few students who were still attempting to focus on their exams. I told her about my family problems, my relationship issues, my fears about failing organic chemistry. She listened, gave advice, acted like she cared, but the whole time she was, what, gathering intelligence? Studying us like lab rats? Professor Hartley cleared his throat. Perhaps we should postpone the remainder of this exam and reconvene when we have more information about the situation. But Connor wasn't ready to leave. The classroom had become the scene of the most significant event of his college experience, possibly his entire life, and walking away felt like abandoning a mystery that demanded answers. Professor, in your expert opinion, what do you think just happened here? You've studied psychology, human behavior, trauma responses. Does any of this fit patterns you recognize? Professor Hartley considered the question seriously, his academic training finally providing a framework for analysis. What I witnessed suggests someone with extensive military training who has been maintaining deep cover for an extended period of time. The ease with which she transitioned between her student persona and her military identity indicates significant psychological compartmentalization skills. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The fact that she was able to maintain this deception for 2 years in close quarters with peers and instructors suggests either exceptional training or exceptional natural aptitude for intelligence work. Possibly both. Tyler raised his hand, a gesture that seemed absurdly formal given the circumstances. Do you think she was spying on us, like gathering information about students and faculty? I think, Professor Hartley said slowly, that speculation without evidence is dangerous. But I will say this. The level of resources involved in what we just witnessed, Navy SEALs, coordinated extraction, federal protocols, suggests that Miss Brennan's mission here was significant enough to warrant substantial government investment.
Emma had been quiet during this exchange, but now she looked up from her phone with an expression of growing alarm. "There's something else. I just remembered something that seemed weird at the time, but I didn't think much of it." The room focused on her with laser intensity. "Last month, there was that security scare on campus, remember? Someone reported suspicious activity near the computer science building, and campus security did a sweep, but never found anything." Connor nodded. Several buildings had been temporarily evacuated while authorities investigated reports of unusual electronic activity. "Zoe wasn't in our room that night. I assumed she was at the library or maybe staying with a friend, but when I asked her about it the next day, she said she had been there all evening. But I know she wasn't because I was there all night studying, and she never came home." The implications hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they understood about coincidence and normal student behavior. "You think she was involved in whatever happened that night?" Tyler asked. "I think," Emma said quietly, "that there's a lot more to this story than just one undercover student. I think we've been living in the middle of something much bigger than any of us realized." Professor Hartley looked around the classroom at the faces of students who had come in expecting a routine psychology exam and were leaving with questions that would reshape how they viewed reality itself. "Class dismissed," he said unnecessarily. "And I suggest that everyone keep what happened here today to yourselves until we understand more about the situation." But Connor knew that silence would be impossible. What they had witnessed was too extraordinary, too paradigm-shifting to contain within the walls of Psychology 301. The story would spread, mutate, and grow, taking on a life of its own as it moved through the university community. As students began gathering their belongings and filing out in small, whispering groups, Connor realized that this was just the beginning. Zoe Brennan's dramatic departure had opened a door to questions that demanded answers, and he suspected that the quiet girl from row 3 had left behind more mysteries than anyone was prepared to solve.
The news of what happened in Psychology 301 spread through Riverside State University like wildfire through dry grass. Within 2 hours of Zoe's dramatic departure, half the campus was buzzing with increasingly wild versions of the story. By evening, the incident had evolved from Navy SEALs visited a classroom to the government raided the university to there was a terrorist cell operating in the dorms. Connor Walsh found himself at the center of a media storm he had never asked for. His phone buzzed constantly with texts from friends, classmates, and even people he barely knew, all demanding details about what had really happened. The university's student newspaper, the Riverside Review, had already reached out requesting an interview, and Connor could see news vans gathering in the parking lots around campus. But it was the official response, or rather the lack of one, that worried him most. Dean Patricia Williams had issued a brief statement that afternoon. "This morning's incident in the psychology department involved a routine security exercise coordinated with federal authorities. No students or faculty were in danger at any time. The university is cooperating fully with all appropriate agencies and considers the matter resolved." The statement raised more questions than it answered. What kind of routine security exercise required Navy SEALs? Why hadn't students or faculty been notified in advance? And most importantly, where was Zoe Brennan? Connor had tried calling the number Zoe had listed in the student directory, but it went straight to a generic voicemail that didn't even mention her name. Her social media accounts had gone silent. No new posts, no responses to the dozens of messages people were leaving on her profiles asking for explanations. Emma Vasquez had spent the afternoon in their shared dorm room, conducting what she called forensic investigation of Zoe's belongings. What she found only deepened the mystery. "It's like she was preparing to disappear," Emma told Connor when he stopped by that evening. "Look at this." She gestured to Zoe's side of the room, which looked exactly as it had that morning, but felt completely different under scrutiny. The bed was made with military precision. Hospital corners so sharp they could cut paper. The desk was organized with the kind of systematic efficiency that suggested someone accustomed to rapid deployment.
And the personal items that Emma had always assumed were normal college possessions now seemed carefully curated to project a specific image. Her textbooks, Emma said, pulling several volumes from Zoe's shelf. Look at the condition they're in. Connor examined the books Emma handed him. They were pristine. No highlighting, no margin notes, no dog-eared pages. For someone who consistently earned B-plus grades, Zoe apparently took remarkably clean notes. Either she's the most careful student in history, Emma continued, or these books are props, like she bought them to look like a normal psychology major but never actually studied from them. Connor opened one of the books to a random page. The binding cracked slightly, suggesting the book had rarely been opened. But she knew the material. I watched her in class discussions when she did participate. She understood the concepts. Right, which means she learned them somewhere else, somewhere that didn't involve highlighting textbooks like a normal student. Emma opened Zoe's laptop, which surprisingly wasn't password protected. The desktop was as clean and generic as everything else. Standard university software, a few homework documents with names like Psych 301 SA2.docs, and a browser history that showed searches for things like abnormal psychology theories and veteran reintegration challenges. It's too perfect, Emma said, scrolling through folders that contained exactly what you'd expect from a psychology major's computer. Real college students have messy digital lives. We have random photos, music downloads, stupid memes, shopping websites in our browser history. This looks like someone created a computer profile for a fictional character. Connor was beginning to understand the scope of the deception. Zoe hadn't just been hiding her real identity. She had constructed an entirely fictional persona, complete with academic records, social media presence, and lifestyle choices designed to make her invisible within the university environment. The roommate matching system, Connor said suddenly. How did you end up living with her? Emma pulled up the housing portal on her own laptop. Random assignment based on the questionnaire we filled out as incoming freshmen. We both marked quiet study environment, early bedtime, non-smoker, basic compatibility stuff. Or, Connor suggested, someone made sure you were matched with a roommate whose preferences would complement a deep cover operative who needed to maintain consistent schedules and avoid social complications. The implications were staggering. If Zoe's housing assignment had been manipulated, it suggested a level of planning and institutional access that went beyond a simple undercover mission. Emma's phone rang, interrupting their investigation. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It's my mom. She never calls during the week unless... She answered with growing apprehension. Hi, Mom. What's wrong?
Connor could hear only one side of the conversation, but Emma's expression told him it wasn't good news. What do you mean, men in suits? When? What did they want to know? Emma's voice rose with each question. Mom, you didn't give them any information about my roommate, did you? What kind of information? Emma listened for several more minutes, her face growing pale, before hanging up. Federal agents visited my parents this afternoon, she said quietly. They showed credentials and asked detailed questions about my living situation, my relationship with Zoe, whether I had ever noticed anything unusual about her behavior or possessions. Connor felt a chill run down his spine. What did your parents tell them? Everything. They thought they were helping with some kind of background check. They told the agents about our phone conversations, about how I'd mentioned my quiet roommate who never caused any trouble, about how Zoe sometimes helped me with psychology assignments. The net was widening. Whatever operation Zoe had been part of, its conclusion was generating a systematic cleanup that involved investigating everyone who had been close to her. Emma, what if we're in danger? What if knowing about this makes us targets? Emma shook her head, but Connor could see she was trying to convince herself as much as him. We don't know anything. We're just college students who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
But we do know something, Connor argued. We know that a government operative spent 2 years embedded in our university. We know that whatever she was doing was important enough to justify an extraction by Navy SEALs. We know that federal agents are now investigating everyone who had contact with her. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Connor Walsh, we need to talk. Meet me at the Riverside Diner on Main Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. Do not mention this message to anyone. Someone who knew Zoe. Connor showed the message to Emma, whose face went white. This is insane! This morning I was worried about a psychology exam, and now I'm getting mysterious text messages from people who knew my roommate. Are you going to meet them? Connor stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the delete button. Every rational part of his mind told him to erase the text, forget about Zoe Brennan, and focus on finishing his senior year like a normal college student. But the larger part of him, the part that had spent the day replaying every interaction he'd had with the most enigmatic person he'd ever encountered, knew he couldn't let this go. Yeah, he said finally. I'm going to meet them. Emma grabbed his arm. Connor, this isn't a game. These are people who command Navy SEALs, who can make federal agents appear at your parents' house, who can probably make college students disappear if they become inconvenient. Which is exactly why I need to understand what I've gotten myself into, Connor replied. If I'm already on their radar, and clearly I am, then pretending none of this happened won't make me safer. It'll just make me ignorant. Emma released his arm, but her expression remained worried. What if it's a trap? What if whoever sent that message isn't trying to help you understand anything? What if they're trying to silence you? Connor had considered the same possibility, but something about the phrasing of the message suggested otherwise. If someone wanted to harm him, there were probably more efficient methods than arranging a public meeting at a local diner. I think, he said slowly, that there are people involved in this situation who want the truth to come out. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to help us understand what we've been caught up in. Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying her roommate's perfectly organized living space with new eyes. I keep thinking about what she said before she left, about thanking me for making her feel normal. What if that wasn't part of her cover story? What if she really was grateful for the chance to live like a regular college student, even if it was temporary? Connor nodded. Maybe the hardest part of deep cover isn't maintaining the deception. Maybe it's remembering who you really are underneath the role you're playing. As evening settled over the campus, Connor and Emma found themselves staring out the dorm room window at students walking to dinner, heading to the library, going about their normal college routines, as if the world had fundamentally shifted that morning. Somewhere out there, Zoe Brennan was probably beginning a new mission, adopting a new identity, preparing to disappear into another carefully constructed life. But she had left behind two people who would never again be able to look at the world around them without wondering what secrets were hiding in plain sight. Tomorrow, Connor would meet with someone who claimed to have known the real Zoe. Tonight, he would lie awake wondering if he was making the smartest decision of his life or the last decision he would ever make as a free man. Either way, there was no going back to the comfortable ignorance of this morning's psychology exam. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The Riverside Diner on Main Street had seen better decades. Its red vinyl booths were cracked and patched with duct tape. The coffee was strong enough to dissolve metal, and the waitresses had been working there since Connor was in elementary school. It was exactly the kind of place where someone could have a conversation without worrying about being overheard by college students or university faculty. Connor arrived at 1:55 p.m., 5 minutes early out of nervous habit. He ordered coffee he didn't want and tried to look casual while scanning the restaurant for anyone who might be his mysterious contact.
The lunch crowd was thinning out, a few construction workers finishing late meals, an elderly couple sharing pie, a businessman reading a newspaper while eating alone. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman in her early 30s slid into the booth across from him. She was unremarkable in the way that Zoe had been unremarkable. Average height, brown hair, clothes that wouldn't stand out in any crowd. But her eyes held the same alert intelligence that Connor had learned to recognize as a sign of something more than surface appearances suggested. "Connor Walsh," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Detective Sarah Chen with the University Police Department. Thank you for coming." Connor shook her hand, noting the firm grip and calluses that suggested regular physical training. "Detective Chen? I thought university police handled things like parking violations and noise complaints." "Usually we do," she said, signaling the waitress for coffee, "but sometimes we get involved in situations that are significantly more complex than underage drinking parties." The waitress brought coffee and left them alone. Detective Chen added cream with the methodical precision of someone buying time to choose her words carefully. "Connor, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us. Not your roommate, not your girlfriend, not your parents. Do you understand?" "I understand that you're asking me to keep secrets, but I don't understand why I should agree to that before I know what the secrets are." Detective Chen smiled slightly, the first genuine expression Connor had seen from her. "Smart answer. That's exactly the kind of response that made certain people take notice of you." "What certain people?" "The same people who have been watching Zoe Brennan's interactions for the past 2 years. The same people who noted that you were one of the few students who actually paid attention to her behavior patterns, who asked questions when things didn't add up." Connor felt his stomach drop. "You're telling me I've been under surveillance?" "Not surveillance, exactly. Observation. There's a difference, though I understand it might not feel that way from your perspective." Detective Chen leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Connor, Zoe Brennan wasn't just any undercover operative. She was part of a specialized program designed to test security vulnerabilities at universities with significant government research contracts. Riverside State might seem like a typical college, but we house some very sensitive projects." "What kind of projects?" "The kind that unfriendly foreign governments would pay substantial amounts of money to learn about. The kind that requires security measures most students never notice because they're designed to be invisible." Connor thought about the campus he had called home for 4 years, trying to see it through this new lens. "You're saying our university is some kind of military research facility disguised as a college?" "I'm saying your university conducts legitimate academic research that sometimes has applications beyond the classroom. And when that research involves areas like cybersecurity, advanced materials, or biotechnology, it attracts attention from people who don't have America's best interests at heart." Detective Chen pulled out her phone and showed Connor a photograph. It was Zoe, but not the Zoe he knew. This version had shorter hair, wore military fatigues, and stood next to equipment Connor couldn't identify in what appeared to be a desert location. Staff Sergeant Alexandria Torres, United States Navy, specialist in counterintelligence and security assessment. She spent the last 8 years identifying vulnerabilities in high-value targets and developing protocols to address them. Connor stared at the photograph. The person in military gear bore only superficial resemblance to the quiet psychology student he had known. This version of Zoe looked dangerous, competent, and completely at home in what was obviously a hostile environment. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're going to hear a lot of different stories about what happened yesterday, and most of them will be wrong. The university will downplay the incident to avoid panic. The media will sensationalize it to sell newspapers. Federal agencies will classify everything to protect ongoing operations." Detective Chen put the phone away. "But you were there. You saw the real interaction between Zoe and Commander Hunt. You understand that this wasn't just a training exercise or a bureaucratic mistake." "So, what was it?" "A graduation ceremony." Connor waited for elaboration, but Detective Chen seemed content to let that cryptic statement hang in the air. Graduation from what?
From a 2-year assignment that successfully identified 17 separate security breaches, prevented 3 potential intelligence leaks, and provided detailed assessments that will reshape how we protect sensitive research at universities across the country. The scope of what Detective Chen was describing began to dawn on Connor. She wasn't just observing random college life, she was conducting a comprehensive security audit. Correct. And her final report included specific recommendations about personnel who demonstrated the analytical skills and discretion necessary for sensitive work. Connor felt the conversation taking a turn he wasn't prepared for. Personnel like who? Like a senior psychology major who noticed behavioral inconsistencies in his classmate that everyone else overlooked. Like someone who asked the right questions when faced with information that didn't fit established patterns. Detective Chen reached into her jacket and withdrew a business card. Unlike the blank card Zoe had given him in the original story Connor had heard, this one contained contact information for something called the Department of Strategic Educational Assessment. Connor, what happened yesterday wasn't the end of Zoe's mission. It was the beginning of yours, if you're interested. My mission? There are 47 universities in the United States that conduct research requiring this level of security assessment. Each one needs people who can blend into the academic environment while maintaining the observational skills necessary to identify potential threats. Connor looked at the business card, his hands trembling slightly. You're offering me a job as an undercover operative? I'm offering you the opportunity to continue your education while serving your country in ways that most people will never know about. Your psychology background, your analytical abilities, and your demonstrated discretion make you an ideal candidate for this program. What about my life? My plans, my family? Your life would appear completely normal from the outside. You'd finish your degree, perhaps pursue graduate school, maybe take a job at a university or a research institution. Your family and friends would see you following a conventional academic path. Detective Chen paused, studying Connor's face. But you'd also be part of a network of people working to protect some of America's most important intellectual assets from foreign intelligence services, terrorist organizations, and industrial espionage. Connor thought about Emma's discovery of federal agents interviewing her parents about the systematic way Zoe's entire identity had been constructed and maintained, about the implications of living a life where nothing was exactly what it seemed. How do I know you're telling me the truth? How do I know this isn't some kind of test or trap? You don't, Detective Chen said simply. That's part of what makes this work so challenging. You have to make decisions based on incomplete information while maintaining absolute discretion about operations you can't fully understand. She stood up, leaving money on the table for her untouched coffee. The card has a phone number. If you're interested in learning more, call within 48 hours. If you're not interested, destroy the card and forget this conversation ever happened. What if I want to talk to someone else about this? What if I want advice from people I trust? Then you're not the right person for this job, Detective Chen said bluntly. This work requires people who can make critical decisions independently without the luxury of consulting friends or family. As she turned to leave, Cotter called after her. Detective Chen, what happened to Zoe? Where is she now? Staff Sergeant Torres is beginning her next assignment. If you join this program, you might encounter her again someday, or you might not. Operational security often requires that people with shared experiences maintain distance from each other. After she left, Connor sat alone in the diner booth, staring at the business card and trying to process the conversation that had just changed the trajectory of his entire life. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been passing Professor Hartley's abnormal psychology exam. Now he was being recruited for work that would make that exam seem like a children's puzzle.
The card felt heavier than it should, as if it contained more than just contact information. It represented a choice between the comfortable predictability of normal life and the uncertain demands of service that operated in shadows and secrets. Connor thought about Zoe's final words to the classroom. "Thank you for making me feel normal." Perhaps the most difficult part of the work wasn't maintaining cover or gathering intelligence. It was remembering what normal felt like when you could never really be part of it. He put the card in his wallet and walked back to campus, knowing that whatever decision he made would define not just his career, but his understanding of who he was willing to become in service of something larger than himself.
Emma Vasquez was waiting in their dorm room when Connor returned from his meeting at the Riverside Diner. She had spent the afternoon continuing her investigation into Zoe's belongings, and the expression on her face told him she had discovered something significant. "Connor, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind him and activating the white noise app on her phone. "And we need to be very careful about how we talk." Connor noticed that Emma had rearranged furniture in their room, moving their chairs away from the windows and closer to the center of the space. She had also unplugged Zoe's computer and covered it with a towel. "Emma, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I have," she said quietly. "Or at least I've seen evidence that our room might have been under surveillance for the past 18 months. Emma led Connor to Zoe's desk and pointed to a small device that looked like a standard USB hub. "I was trying to figure out why Zoe's internet connection was always so much faster than mine, even though we're supposedly on the same network. So I started looking at her computer setup more carefully." She lifted the towel covering Zoe's laptop, revealing several small electronic devices Connor hadn't noticed before. "These aren't standard college tech accessories. I looked them up online, and they're professional-grade signal boosters and data collection tools, the kind of equipment that costs more than most students spend on textbooks for their entire degree." Connor examined the devices, though their purpose was beyond his technical understanding. "What do you think they were for?" "I think Zoe was monitoring all the network traffic in our dorm section. Every email, every social media post, every online search conducted by students in our building was probably being filtered through her equipment." The implications were staggering. Connor thought about all the personal information he had shared over the university's wireless network: private messages, academic records, financial information, family communications. If Emma was right, Zoe had access to the digital lives of hundreds of students. "But why?" Connor asked. "What would she need that information for?" Emma pulled out a notebook filled with her handwriting. She'd been thinking about that all afternoon, trying to piece together a timeline of everything unusual that happened since Zoe moved in. She flipped to a page covered with dates and events. "Remember the cybersecurity scare last semester? The one where several students received phishing emails that looked like they came from university administration?" Connor nodded. The incident had prompted campus-wide warnings about email security and mandatory password changes for all student accounts. Zoe was the one who first reported receiving those emails. She brought them to the IT department, which led to the discovery that it was a coordinated attack targeting students with access to specific research projects. Emma turned to another page in her notebook. "And the break-in at the engineering building 3 months ago? The one where nothing was actually stolen, but security footage showed someone had accessed computer terminals in labs conducting classified research." "You think Zoe was involved in that too?" "I think Zoe prevented it. Look at the timeline. She was sick that day, missed all her classes, but her student ID card was used to access buildings all over campus during the hours when the break-in occurred." Connor studied Emma's notes, seeing a pattern emerge that painted a picture of Zoe as an active security operative rather than a passive observer. She wasn't just gathering intelligence, she was actively defending against threats. Exactly. And I think some of those threats came from people right here on campus. Emma flipped to a section of her notebook titled Suspicious Students.
She had compiled a list of names, dates, and behaviors that had seemed innocuous at the time, but now appeared potentially significant. Remember Viktor Petrov from our comparative politics class? The exchange student from Eastern Europe who was always asking questions about American military research? Connor remembered Victor, a graduate student who seemed genuinely interested in academic discussions about international relations. What about him? He transferred to another university right after the cybersecurity incident, left in the middle of the semester with no explanation, which is almost unheard of for international students because of visa complications. Emma continued down her list. And Professor Martin Chen in the computer science department, the one who took that mysterious leave of absence last month, I found out he was working on encryption algorithms with potential military applications. How did you find that out? Zoe's browsing history wasn't as clean as it appeared. I found deleted files that showed she was researching faculty members, their research projects, their funding sources, their international connections.
Connor felt a chill as he realized the scope of what Emma was describing. You're saying our university was infiltrated by foreign intelligence operatives, and Zoe was running counterintelligence operations to identify and neutralize them? I'm saying that's what the evidence suggests, and I think we were all unknowing participants in something much larger than a simple security assessment. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. What is it? It's from my academic advisor. She wants to meet with me tomorrow morning to discuss irregularities in my academic record. She's never contacted me outside of registration periods before. Connor thought about his own meeting with Detective Chen, about the recruitment opportunity that suddenly seemed less like a career choice and more like the next phase of an operation that had been in motion for months. Emma, I need to tell you about my meeting today. He described his conversation with Detective Chen, the revelation about Zoe's true identity, and the recruitment offer he had received. Emma listened with growing alarm as she realized the net was closing around everyone who had been close to Zoe. They're not just recruiting you, she said when he finished. They're neutralizing potential security risks. Anyone who knows too much about Zoe's real mission needs to be either brought into the program or silenced somehow. Silenced how? Think about it, Connor. What's the best way to ensure that college students don't talk about classified operations they accidentally witnessed? You discredit them, transfer them to other schools, or offer them opportunities that require security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. Connor realized that Emma was probably right. The meeting with his academic advisor was likely the beginning of a process that would either recruit her into the program or find other ways to manage her knowledge of recent events. So what do we do? Emma closed her notebook and looked directly at Connor. We have a choice. We can pretend none of this happened, accept whatever opportunities or transfers they offer us, and spend the rest of our lives wondering what we really witnessed. Or we try to understand the full scope of what's been happening here, document everything we can, and make sure there's a record of the truth before it gets buried in classified files and official denials. Connor thought about Detective Chen's warning that this work required people who could make critical decisions independently without consulting friends or family. But Emma wasn't just a friend, she was a fellow witness to something that had challenged everything they thought they understood about their world. If we choose the second option, we're potentially putting ourselves in serious danger. We're already in danger, Emma pointed out. The moment we witnessed Zoe's extraction, we became loose ends in someone's operation. The question is whether we want to be passive loose ends who get tied up by other people or active participants who try to maintain some control over our own fate. As evening settled over the campus, Connor and Emma found themselves facing a decision that would determine not just their immediate future, but their understanding of their role as citizens in a democracy where some truths were considered too dangerous for public consumption. Outside their window, other students were heading to dinner, studying in the library, living the normal college lives that Connor and Emma could never fully return to.
They had seen behind the curtain of ordinary campus life and discovered a world where professors might be foreign agents, where custodians could be Navy SEALs, and where the quiet girl in row 3 might be the most dangerous person in the room. The question now was whether they had the courage to keep looking, knowing that some knowledge came with a price that could never be unpaid. Emma opened her laptop and began typing. If we're going to do this, we need to document everything before they have a chance to make it disappear. Connor watched her work, knowing that with each keystroke, they were crossing a line that would change their lives forever. But some lines, once you became aware of them, demanded to be crossed. The real education was just beginning.
Emma's meeting with her academic advisor, Dr. Angela Price, was scheduled for 9 a.m. the following morning in the administration building. Connor insisted on walking her there, though they both knew his presence wouldn't provide any real protection if the meeting was what they suspected it to be. "Remember," Connor said as they approached the building, "document everything. Names, times, exactly what they say and how they say it." Emma nodded, touching the small recording app on her phone to make sure it was ready. "If I'm not back in an hour, call that number Detective Chen gave you." "Emma, maybe we should reconsider this. Maybe we should just take whatever opportunities they're offering and move on with our lives." Emma stopped walking and looked at Connor with an expression that reminded him of the way Zoe had looked at Commander Hunt, determined, focused, and completely unafraid. "Connor, my parents immigrated to this country because they believed in the idea that ordinary citizens could live free from government surveillance and manipulation. If I just accept whatever story they're selling about Zoe and about what's been happening here, I'm betraying everything my family sacrificed to achieve." She entered the building, leaving Connor to wait on a bench outside, pretending to study while actually monitoring everyone who entered or exited the administration offices. Dr. Angela Price's office was on the 3rd floor, behind a door marked Student Academic Services. Emma had been there once before, during her sophomore year for routine degree planning. The space had seemed welcoming then, filled with plants, student artwork, and the comfortable clutter of an educator who genuinely cared about helping students succeed. Today, the office felt different. The plants were gone, the artwork had been replaced with generic university posters, and Dr. Price herself seemed like a different person entirely. "Emma, thank you for coming," Dr. Price said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I hope you don't mind, but I've asked a colleague to join us for this conversation." A man in his 40s entered from a side office Emma hadn't noticed before. He wore a conservative suit and carried himself with the kind of authority that made it clear he wasn't university staff. "Ms. Vasquez, you've been sharing living space with someone who is conducting classified government work. We need to understand the extent of your knowledge regarding her activities." "I lived with a psychology major named Zoe Brennan, who kept to herself and helped me with homework sometimes. If she was doing classified work, she never mentioned it to me." Dr. Price leaned forward with an expression that was supposed to look concerned, but came across as rehearsed. "Emma, we know this situation must be confusing and frightening for you. No one is suggesting you've done anything wrong. We're simply trying to ensure that sensitive information doesn't inadvertently become public." "What sensitive information? I don't know anything about sensitive information." Mr. Mitchell consulted his folder. "You've conducted several internet searches in the past 48 hours related to military units, classified operations, and federal law enforcement procedures. You've also been asking questions about your roommate's background and possessions." Emma felt a chill as she realized they had been monitoring her online activity. "It's not illegal to be curious about something unusual that happened in my living space." "Of course not," Mr. Mitchell agreed, "but curiosity can sometimes lead people to make poor decisions about what information they share and with whom they share it." Dr. Price pulled out a document and placed it on the desk between them. "Emma, we'd like to offer you an opportunity that we think you'll find very attractive. The university has received funding for a new study abroad program focused on international psychology research.
You would spend your final semester in Switzerland, working with renowned researchers and earning credits that would significantly enhance your graduate school applications. Emma glanced at the document, which outlined a program that sounded impressive and completely fabricated. This opportunity became available just now, right after I started asking questions about my roommate? The timing is coincidental, Dr. Price said, though she didn't expect Emma to believe that. We think a change of environment would be beneficial for you after the stress of recent events.
Mr. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, his posture suggesting the conversation was about to take a different direction. Miss Vasquez, let me be direct. Your roommate was involved in activities that fall under federal jurisdiction. The people who oversee those activities take a very serious view of unauthorized disclosure of classified information. I haven't disclosed anything to anyone. Haven't you? We're aware of your conversations with Connor Walsh. We know about your investigation into equipment found in your shared living space. We know you've been documenting theories about foreign intelligence operations on this campus. Emma's heart rate increased, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. Are you threatening me? We're offering you choices, Dr. Price interjected quickly. The study abroad program is one option. We could also arrange for you to transfer to another university for your final semester with full credit transfer and enhanced financial aid. And if I choose neither of those options? Mr. Mitchell's expression hardened slightly. Then we would need to consider other measures to protect national security interests, measures that might include formal security clearance investigations, background checks that could affect your future employment prospects, and legal constraints on your ability to discuss certain topics. Emma understood the threat clearly. Accept exile to Switzerland or another university, or face a lifetime of government scrutiny that would make normal career and personal relationships impossible. I need time to think about this. Of course, Dr. Price said, take all the time you need, but please understand that these opportunities won't remain available indefinitely. Mr. Mitchell stood and handed Emma a business card. If you have any questions about the security implications of your situation, please contact me directly. And Ms. Vasquez, I strongly recommend that you avoid discussing this meeting with other students. Such discussions could complicate things unnecessarily. Emma left the building feeling like she had just survived the first round of a game whose rules she was only beginning to understand. Connor was waiting exactly where she had left him, though she noticed he wasn't alone. Two students she didn't recognize were sitting on nearby benches, and something about their positioning suggested they weren't there by coincidence. How did it go? Connor asked as they walked away from the administration building. About as well as we expected, Emma said quietly. They offered me a study abroad program in Switzerland and made it clear that refusing their generosity would have consequences. Switzerland, that's a new one. Connor, they knew about our conversations, about my internet searches, about everything we've been doing since Zoe left. We're not just investigating them, they're investigating us. As they reached the student union building, Connor's phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Chen's number. Mr. Walsh, I hope you've had time to consider our conversation yesterday. I'm still thinking about it. That's understandable. Complex decisions require careful consideration. However, I should mention that circumstances have evolved since our meeting. It would be beneficial for us to speak again soon. What kind of circumstances? The kind that are better discussed in person. Are you available this afternoon? Connor looked at Emma, who was listening to his side of the conversation with growing concern. Detective Chen, I appreciate the opportunity you've presented, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this kind of work. Mr. Walsh, at this point, the question isn't whether you're right for the work. The question is whether the work has already found you. The line went dead, leaving Connor staring at his phone and realizing that their amateur investigation had attracted exactly the kind of attention they had been hoping to avoid. We're in over our heads, Emma said quietly. Yeah, Connor agreed, but I don't think backing down is an option anymore. They had wanted to understand the truth about Zoe Brennan and the operations at their university. Now they were discovering that some truths came with consequences that extended far beyond satisfying curiosity. They were no longer students investigating a mystery.
They were potential assets in an intelligence operation that had been running longer and reaching deeper than either of them had imagined. The confrontation had revealed the stakes, but it had also revealed their resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together, armed with the knowledge that ordinary college students could sometimes find themselves at the center of extraordinary circumstances, whether they had chosen that role or not.
Connor's second meeting with Detective Chen took place in a location that made the Riverside diner seem quaint by comparison. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town looked like something from a spy thriller, complete with concrete walls, minimal lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that suggested serious conversations about serious matters. Detective Chen was waiting inside, but she wasn't alone. 3 other people sat at a metal table under harsh fluorescent lighting, 2 men and a woman, all wearing the kind of conservative business attire that screamed federal government. "Connor, thank you for coming," Detective Chen said. "I'd like you to meet some colleagues who can provide more complete information about the situation you found yourself in." The woman at the table stood and extended her hand. "Agent Rebecca Stone, Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Walsh, please have a seat." Connor remained standing, his instincts telling him that sitting down would somehow commit him to whatever they were about to propose. "Agent Stone, before we go any further, I need to understand something. Are Emma Vasquez and I in legal trouble? Are we being investigated for crimes?" Agent Stone smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. "Mr. Walsh, you're not in legal trouble, but you are in a situation that requires careful handling to ensure the safety of ongoing operations and the security of classified information." One of the men spoke up. "My name is Captain Ryan Foster, U.S. Navy. I was Staff Sergeant Torres's commanding officer during her previous assignments, including her time at Riverside State University." Connor felt a jolt of recognition. "Torres? You mean Zoe Brennan?" "Staff Sergeant Alexandria Torres, yes. The woman you knew as Zoe Brennan." Captain Foster opened a tablet and showed Connor an official military photograph. It was definitely Zoe, but wearing dress blues with ribbons and decorations that spoke of significant service record. "Mr. Walsh," Agent Stone continued, "what Detective Chen told you about university security assessments was accurate, but incomplete. The operation at Riverside State was part of something much larger." She activated a presentation screen that displayed a map of the United States with dozens of red dots marking locations across the country. "For the past 5 years, we've been conducting comprehensive security assessments at universities, research institutions, and government facilities that house sensitive information or conduct classified research. The program is called Project Academic Shield." The second man explained. "I'm Dr. Michael Torres, no relation to Staff Sergeant Torres, from the National Security Agency. Our mission is to identify vulnerabilities before foreign intelligence services can exploit them." Connor studied the map, noting that the red dots seemed to cluster around major research universities and military installations. "How many operations like this are currently active?" 47 institutions are currently under assessment, Dr. Torres replied. "Each operation requires between 2 and 4 years to complete, depending on the complexity of the security environment." Captain Foster leaned forward. "Mr. Walsh, Staff Sergeant Torres's mission at your university uncovered something we hadn't expected to find. Evidence of a coordinated intelligence operation targeting multiple universities simultaneously." Agent Stone activated another screen showing photographs of people Connor recognized: Victor Petrov, Professor Chen, and several other faculty and students he had seen around campus. These individuals were part of a foreign intelligence network that had been operating for at least 3 years before Staff Sergeant Torres arrived. They were systematically gathering information about research projects, recruiting sources within the academic community, and attempting to access classified databases. The cybersecurity incidents, the attempted break-ins, the mysterious departures, all of that was related to this network? Connor asked. "Correct," Captain Foster confirmed. "Staff Sergeant Torres's mission at your university didn't just assess security vulnerabilities, she actively disrupted an ongoing espionage operation that could have compromised critical research across multiple institutions." Dr. Torres activated a third screen showing a complex organizational chart. The network was more sophisticated than anything we had previously encountered in academic settings.
It included foreign graduate students, visiting professors, administrative staff, and even some American citizens who had been recruited through financial incentives or ideological manipulation. Connor felt overwhelmed by the scope of what they were describing. So when the Navy SEALs came to extract Staff Sergeant Torres, that was because the operation had been completed successfully? Partially, Agent Stone said. Her cover was compromised, but not in the way you might think. She showed Connor a photograph taken with a telephoto lens. She showed him and Emma in their dorm room, examining Zoe's equipment and taking notes. Your investigation into Staff Sergeant Torres's activities was noted by members of the Foreign Intelligence Network that were still active on campus. They began to suspect that their operation had been compromised and were preparing to accelerate their timeline, which would have meant destroying evidence and potentially eliminating witnesses, Captain Foster added grimly.
Connor's blood ran cold. You're saying Emma and I were in actual physical danger? You were becoming a threat to people who had invested years in establishing their network, Dr. Torres explained. Foreign intelligence operatives don't typically leave loose ends when their operations are at risk. Agent Stone leaned back in her chair. The extraction of Staff Sergeant Torres served multiple purposes. It removed her from potential danger, signaled to the foreign operatives that we were aware of their activities, and allowed us to begin the process of rolling up their entire network. What happened to them, the foreign operatives? Some were arrested, some were deported, and some simply disappeared before we could apprehend them, Captain Foster said. But the network at Riverside State has been effectively dismantled. Connor tried to process the information, but one question kept nagging at him. If Staff Sergeant Torres's mission was complete, why are you telling me all this? Why not just let Emma and me finish our degrees and move on with our lives? Agent Stone and Captain Foster exchanged glances before Agent Stone spoke. Because, Mr. Walsh, you and Miss Vasquez demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking and operational awareness that this program needs. Your investigation into Staff Sergeant Torres's activities was remarkably thorough for civilians with no intelligence training. You identified security vulnerabilities that our own operatives had missed, Dr. Torres added. You recognized patterns in seemingly unrelated events. You maintained operational security even when you suspected you were being monitored. Captain Foster opened another folder. More importantly, you showed the courage to pursue the truth even when it became clear that doing so might put you at personal risk. Connor realized where the conversation was heading. You want to recruit us. We want to offer you the opportunity to complete your education while beginning specialized training that would prepare you for careers in intelligence and national security, Agent Stone confirmed. What would that involve exactly? You would finish your degrees at Riverside State, but you would also begin coursework in areas like cybersecurity, international relations, and operational psychology, Dr. Torres explained. Your official transcripts would show a normal academic progression, but you would also be developing skills that are essential for intelligence work. Captain Foster leaned forward. After graduation, you would have opportunities to serve your country in ways that most people never know about, protecting research that could save lives, preventing foreign governments from stealing technology that keeps America safe, ensuring that academic institutions remain places of learning rather than espionage targets. And Emma? What about her situation with the study abroad program? Miss Vasquez is being offered the same opportunity you are, Agent Stone said. The study abroad program was a test to see how she would respond to pressure. Her refusal to accept what she knew was a manufactured solution to silence her concerns demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity we look for in potential operatives. Connor thought about Emma's words earlier that morning, about her family's sacrifice to come to a country where ordinary citizens could live free from government surveillance. The irony of recruiting her into the very system her parents had fled wasn't lost on him. What if we say no? Then you'll complete your degrees, graduate with honors, and pursue whatever careers you choose, Agent Stone said simply. But you'll also sign non-disclosure agreements that prevent you from discussing anything you've learned about Project Academic Shield. And you'll live with the knowledge that you could have been part of something important, something that helps protect the freedoms and opportunities that make places like Riverside State University possible. Dr. Torres activated one final screen showing statistics about foreign intelligence activities targeting American universities. Mr. Walsh, every year, foreign governments steal billions of dollars worth of research from American institutions. That research includes medical breakthroughs that could save lives, technological innovations that could revolutionize industries, and defensive capabilities that help protect our national security. The people working to stop this theft don't get parades or recognition, but they do get the satisfaction of knowing that their service makes a real difference in protecting the things that matter most about American society. Connor looked around the warehouse at these people who had turned his world upside down in less than a week. They were offering him a chance to be part of something larger than himself, but they were also asking him to accept a life where nothing would ever be quite what it seemed. He thought about Zoe's final words to their class about making her feel normal, and wondered if normal was something he would ever be able to experience again if he accepted their offer. The choice, as Detective Chen had warned him, would have to be made independently, without the luxury of consulting friends or family. But at least this time, he understood exactly what he was choosing between.
Connor drove back to campus in a daze, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he had learned. The warehouse meeting had lasted 3 hours, during which Agent Stone and her colleagues had systematically deconstructed everything he thought he understood about his university, his country, and his place in both. Emma was waiting in the student union building, sitting in their usual corner booth with coffee that had long since grown cold. Her expression told Connor that her afternoon had been equally revelatory. "They offered you the same thing, didn't they?" he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Training, specialized education, and a career protecting national security while maintaining the appearance of normal academic life," Emma confirmed, plus a few details about what happens to people who refuse their generous offer. Connor noticed that Emma had positioned herself with a clear view of all entrances to the building and had chosen a table that couldn't be easily observed from outside. She was already thinking like someone trained in operational security. "What did they tell you about the Foreign Intelligence Network?" Emma pulled out her phone and showed Connor a text message from an unknown number. It contained a single photograph, Viktor Petrov in handcuffs being led away by federal agents. "They sent this an hour ago," she said, along with pictures of Professor Chen's arrest and documentation showing that 12 other faculty members and students have been detained or deported in the past 48 hours. Connor stared at the photograph, recognizing the graduate student who had sat 3 rows behind him in comparative politics, who had asked thoughtful questions about American foreign policy, who had seemed like a genuinely curious international scholar. It's hard to accept that we were surrounded by foreign spies for years without realizing it. What's harder to accept is that Zoe, Alexandria, knew about all of them and was systematically gathering evidence while maintaining her cover as an invisible psychology student. Connor thought about the times he had seen Zoe in classes with Victor, the way she had never participated in discussions when he was present, how she had always left immediately after lectures rather than lingering to chat with other students. Behaviors he had attributed to shyness were actually sophisticated counterintelligence tradecraft. "Emma, what are you going to do? About their offer, I mean." Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at students walking across the campus quad. "My parents came to this country with nothing because they believed America offered opportunities that didn't exist where they grew up. They worked multiple jobs, learned a new language, and sacrificed everything so I could have choices they never had." She turned back to Connor. "Now I'm being offered the chance to protect those same opportunities for other people's children. How do I explain to my parents that I turned down the chance to serve the country that gave them refuge?"
But you're also being asked to live a life based on deception and secrecy. That's not what your parents sacrificed for either. No, Emma agreed. But maybe that's the price of protecting the freedoms they wanted me to have. Maybe somebody has to live in the shadows so that everybody else can live in the light. Connor understood what she meant. The warehouse meeting had revealed a hidden world where ordinary-looking people carried extraordinary responsibilities, where the mundane surface of academic life concealed operations that shaped international security, where the freedom to attend college and pursue dreams came at a cost that most people never saw. What about your own dreams? You wanted to become a therapist, help people with trauma and psychological disorders. How does intelligence work fit with that? Emma smiled sadly. Agent Stone showed me statistics about foreign intelligence operations targeting American mental health research. Apparently, our understanding of PTSD treatment, anxiety disorders, and psychological resilience has military applications that other countries are very interested in obtaining. She pulled up a document on her phone. They're offering me specialized training in psychological operations and counterintelligence. I could still help people with trauma, but I'd also be protecting the research that makes new treatments possible. Connor realized that the recruitment offers weren't random. They had been carefully tailored to appeal to each person's existing interests and motivations, making service feel like a natural extension of their academic goals rather than a departure from them. I was offered something similar, he admitted. Training in threat assessment and behavioral analysis. They said my psychology background would be valuable for identifying potential security risks in academic environments. So we'd both be doing work that connects to what we've been studying, just with additional responsibilities that we can never talk about.
They sat in comfortable silence, watching other students live the normal college lives they were being asked to leave behind. Connor noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The casual way people left their belongings unattended, the open discussions of research projects and personal information, the assumption that everyone around them was exactly who they appeared to be. Emma, do you think we ever had a real choice? I mean, from the moment we witnessed Zoe's extraction, were we always going to end up being recruited? Emma considered the question carefully. I think they would have preferred for us to accept the study abroad program and the transfer offers, to just disappear quietly without asking questions. But once we started investigating, once we demonstrated that we couldn't be easily managed or silenced, recruitment became their best option for containing the security risk we represent. So we're being recruited because we're too curious and stubborn to be safely ignored. Exactly. And that probably means we'd be good at the work they're offering us. Connor's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Chen. Decision deadline has been moved up to tomorrow morning. New intelligence requires accelerated timeline for current operations. He showed the message to Emma, who immediately understood the implications. They're not giving us time to think this through or change our minds, she said. Something else is happening that requires them to know whether we're assets or potential problems. Maybe another foreign intelligence network has been discovered. Maybe there are operations at other universities that need immediate attention. Emma stood up and gathered her belongings. Connor, whatever we decide, we need to decide together. If one of us accepts and the other doesn't, we'll never be able to maintain our friendship. Too many secrets, too many restrictions on what we can discuss. As they walked back toward the dormitories, Connor realized that Emma was right. Their shared experience of witnessing Zoe's extraction and uncovering the truth about the intelligence operations at their university had created a bond that would either be strengthened by mutual service or destroyed by divergent choices. There's something else I need to tell you, Emma said as they reached Morrison Hall. Agent Stone mentioned that if we accept their offer, we might work with Alexandria Torres again in the future. She's being assigned to train new recruits in deep cover operations. The possibility of seeing Zoe again, of learning more about the person behind the carefully constructed student persona, added another layer of complexity to an already impossible decision. Would you want that? To work with her again? Emma paused before answering. I spent 18 months living with someone who wasn't real. If I accept this offer, I'll become someone who isn't entirely real either. Maybe working with Alexandria would help me understand how to maintain my actual identity while performing the role they're asking me to play. That evening, Connor and Emma found themselves in the same psychology classroom where everything had begun just 4 days earlier. Professor Hartley's exam booklets were still stacked on his desk, abandoned when Navy SEALs had changed all their lives forever.
It feels like years since we were sitting here taking that test, Emma said. It was a different world then, or maybe it was the same world and we just didn't understand what we were looking at. They sat in their usual seats, Connor 2 rows behind where Zoe had always sat, Emma near the back where she could observe the entire classroom. Now Connor understood why Zoe had chosen her specific position. Close enough to hear everything, positioned for quick exit, with clear sight lines to all potential threats. Emma, if we do this, if we accept their offer, will we still be us? Or will we become different people like Zoe did? Emma looked at the empty seat where their former classmate had spent 2 years perfecting the art of invisibility while protecting them from dangers they had never suspected. I think, she said slowly, that the most important part of this job is remembering who you really are when everyone around you thinks you're someone else. Maybe that's why they recruit people like us, people who ask questions, who care about truth, who won't lose themselves completely in whatever role they're asked to play. As they left the classroom for what might be the last time as normal students, Connor realized that tomorrow's decision would determine not just their careers, but their understanding of what it meant to serve something larger than themselves. The quiet girl in row 3 had taught them that heroism often looked like ordinary people living ordinary lives while carrying extraordinary burdens. Now they were being asked to become those ordinary people, to take their place among the invisible guardians who protected the freedoms that made places like Riverside State University possible. The choice would be made in the morning, but the education had already changed them forever.
Connor Walsh stood outside the administration building at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before his scheduled meeting with Agent Stone and her team. Emma Vasquez was beside him, both of them dressed in the kind of conservative business attire that suggested they understood the gravity of the decision they were about to make. They had spent the previous evening walking around campus, saying goodbye to places that held 4 years of memories. The library where Connor had pulled all-nighters studying for organic chemistry, the coffee shop where Emma had spent countless hours video calling her parents back home, the psychology building where they had first encountered Professor Hartley and the exam that had changed everything. "Any last second doubts?" Emma asked, adjusting the folder containing documents they had prepared for this meeting. "About 100, I admitted, but not about the decision itself, just about whether we really understand what we're getting ourselves into." Emma nodded. "I keep thinking about what my parents will think when I tell them I'm pursuing graduate studies in international relations instead of clinical psychology. They'll be proud, but they'll also wonder why I suddenly changed directions so dramatically." "Your cover story is solid," Connor assured her. "Professor Hartley already agreed to provide references about your exceptional analytical abilities and your interest in how psychological principles apply to national security issues." The irony wasn't lost on either of them that Professor Hartley, who had been as shocked as anyone by the Navy SEAL extraction, was now unknowingly providing academic cover for their recruitment into the intelligence community. Agent Stone had explained that the professor's genuine surprise and confusion would make his recommendations more convincing than fabricated documents. Connor, Emma, Detective Chen appeared at the building entrance, looking more relaxed than they had ever seen her. "Thank you for coming. Are you ready?" They followed her to the same conference room where Emma had been offered the Switzerland study abroad program just 3 days earlier. The space had been reconfigured with different furniture and equipment, suggesting that Agent Stone's team had been using the university's facilities as a temporary command center. Agent Stone was waiting with Captain Foster and Dr. Torres, but the atmosphere was noticeably different from their previous meetings. Instead of the formal interrogation setup, the room now felt more like a briefing space where colleagues gathered to discuss shared objectives. "Miss Vasquez, Mr. Walsh," Agent Stone began, "I hope you've had sufficient time to consider our offer." Connor and Emma exchanged glances before Connor spoke. "We have, and we'd like to accept with some conditions." Agent Stone raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" Emma opened her folder and pulled out a document they had spent hours preparing. "We've outlined specific requirements regarding our ongoing education, our future assignments, and our ability to maintain meaningful relationships with our families." Captain Foster leaned forward to examine the document, his expression unreadable. "This is quite detailed. You've clearly given this serious thought." "We have," Connor confirmed. "We understand this work requires sacrifice and secrecy, but we're not willing to sacrifice everything that makes us who we are. If you want operatives who can maintain authentic human connections, you need to allow us to actually maintain them." Dr. Torres reviewed their list of conditions.
You're requesting permission to continue relationships with family members, albeit with restrictions on what information you can share. You want guarantees about educational opportunities and career advancement. You want assurance that future assignments will utilize your individual strengths rather than treating you as interchangeable assets. Exactly, Emma said. We're willing to serve, but we want to serve as ourselves, not as completely fabricated personas like the one Alexandria created. Agent Stone was quiet for several minutes, reviewing their document and consulting notes on her tablet. Finally, she looked up with an expression that might have been approval. Your conditions are reasonable and demonstrate exactly the kind of thoughtful analysis we hope to see from recruits. Most of what you're requesting aligns with current program guidelines. The few exceptions can be addressed through individual case management.
Captain Foster nodded his agreement. The fact that you negotiated rather than simply accepting our offer tells us you have the independent thinking skills this work requires. There is one additional matter to discuss, Dr. Torres said, activating a presentation screen. Your first assignment. The screen showed a map of a university Connor didn't recognize, red brick buildings around a central quad, Gothic architecture that suggested an old East Coast institution. Georgetown University, Agent Stone explained. They've requested a comprehensive security assessment following some concerning incidents involving international students and visiting faculty. The assignment would begin in January, giving you time to complete your current semester at Riverside State. Emma studied the map carefully. Would we be working together? Initially, yes. Your partnership has proven effective, and the Georgetown situation requires the kind of coordinated approach you've demonstrated. Eventually, you may be assigned to separate operations, but that would depend on your individual development and the specific needs of ongoing missions. Connor felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he realized they were already being given operational details. What kind of concerning incidents? Captain Foster consulted his notes. Attempted access to classified research databases, suspicious patterns in grant funding from international sources, and at least 3 faculty members who have suddenly become wealthy through means that don't align with their academic salaries. Another foreign intelligence network, Emma concluded. Potentially, that's what you'll be there to determine. Agent Stone handed them each a thick folder. These contain your new academic transcripts, financial aid documentation, and housing assignments for Georgetown. Your official reason for transferring is a specialized graduate program in applied psychology and international relations. Connor opened his folder, seeing documents that portrayed a version of his academic history that was true but incomplete. His grades and course selections had been real, but the narrative connecting them now emphasized preparation for graduate work in security studies rather than clinical psychology. When do we start training? Emma asked. You already have, Dr. Torres replied. Everything that's happened over the past week, the investigation, the pressure, the decision-making process, has been part of your initial assessment and preparation. You've demonstrated the ability to maintain operational security, work effectively under stress, and adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Captain Foster smiled. Plus, you've learned firsthand how intelligence operations function in academic environments. That experience will be invaluable when you're conducting your own assessments. Agent Stone gathered the documents they had signed and stood to shake their hands. Welcome to Project Academic Shield. Your first formal briefing will be next week, but for now, focus on completing your current coursework and maintaining your existing relationships and routines. And Connor, Detective Chen added, Professor Hartley has asked to speak with you. He's been wondering about your future plans, and you should be prepared to provide a plausible explanation for your sudden interest in graduate school. As they left the administration building, Connor and Emma found themselves walking across the same campus quad where they had spent 4 years as normal college students. The physical environment was unchanged, but their perspective had been fundamentally altered. Emma, do you think we made the right choice? I think we made the only choice that would let us sleep at night. We could have taken the study abroad program and the transfer offers, but we would have spent the rest of our lives wondering what we had witnessed and whether we could have done something meaningful with that knowledge.
They stopped at the spot where they had first discussed the strange events in Psychology 301, where Connor had noticed Zoe's unusual behavior patterns, and Emma had begun questioning her roommate's carefully constructed identity. Do you think we'll ever see her again? Alexandria, I mean? Emma smiled. Agent Stone mentioned that experienced operatives sometimes train new recruits. Given how much we learned from just observing her for 2 years, I suspect we'll encounter her again somewhere down the line.
6 months later, Connor Walsh and Emma Vasquez were enrolled as graduate students at Georgetown University, sharing an off-campus apartment and maintaining the appearance of two friends pursuing advanced degrees in international relations. Their days were filled with seminars on foreign policy, research methods, and cross-cultural psychology. But their evenings were spent in training sessions that didn't appear on any university schedule. Courses in surveillance detection, operational security, and the art of maintaining cover identities while gathering intelligence about potential security threats. Their professor for one of these evening sessions was someone they recognized, though she looked different with shorter hair and more formal attire. Alexandria Torres, now officially introduced as Dr. Alexandria Torres, specialist in counterintelligence operations. Before we begin tonight's lesson on behavioral analysis, she said to the small group of graduate students who were all more than they appeared to be, I want to thank you for choosing service over security, purpose over comfort. She looked directly at Connor and Emma. The work we do isn't glamorous, and it often requires us to be invisible when we might prefer recognition. But every day that ordinary people can attend universities, pursue research, and share ideas freely is a day that justifies the sacrifices we make to protect those opportunities. As Connor listened to the woman he had once known as the quiet girl in row 3, he realized that their education was just beginning. They had learned that heroism often wore ordinary faces and carried mundane job titles, that the most important battles were fought by people whose names would never appear in history books. The professor thought it was a normal exam day until Navy SEALs crashed in and saluted the quiet girl in row 3. But that dramatic moment had just been the beginning of a story that would span years and touch lives in ways that most people would never know about. In conference rooms and classrooms across the country, other quiet students were taking notes, asking questions, and preparing for exams while secretly protecting the freedoms that made their education possible. They asked for no recognition, no medals, no thanks. They simply showed up, did their work, and disappeared into the background of history. And sometimes, if you knew what to look for, you might catch a glimpse of something extraordinary hidden behind the most ordinary appearance. A reminder that the most important guardians of freedom were often the ones you'd never suspect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.